Hi everyone, welcome to Virtual History 360. I'm Mr. Wade, and today we're going to talk about the compromises that delayed the start of the Civil War. But wait, does that mean the Civil War was inevitable? Well, you need to think back to older lessons. Remember, when Andrew Jackson was president, and remember the whole tariff debacle? John C. Calhoun in South Carolina threatened to secede? Well, during the 19th century, the southern states were always quick to cry foul if they thought northern states were out to get them. Never is this more true than when discussing slavery. By this time, the economy of the South was predicated by slave labor. The economy of the North was not. Even if you take away the human rights angle, there was still a wide margin between the two. Now, let's throw in the fact that abolitionists have been fighting to free the slaves for years. It's easy to see why the southern states would worry about losing their way of life. Every attempt at change was met with staunch resistance and oftentimes hostility. This was a very turbulent time in our history, and although in hindsight the war may have been inevitable, to those living back then, the future was uncertain. There were numerous attempts to keep the peace between the free and the slave states. Today we're going to talk about three of those. Those are the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. So let's get started with the Missouri Compromise of 1820. As you know, each state gets 2 senators, no matter their population. At this time, the number of slave states and the number of free states were equal. There was a balance in the Senate. Well, here comes Missouri, and they want to become a state. A slave state. If they are admitted, then there would be 2 additional senators from slave states, and there would be a clear advantage. Any pro-slavery legislation would certainly get passed. Northern free states did not want this to happen. So the debate over Missouri continued and escalated to the point where people feared the Union would split. This is where Henry Clay steps in and suggests that Maine be admitted as a state at the same time as Missouri, only as a free state. This would keep the balance in the Senate between the free and the slave states. You with me? Good. Not only that, but the compromise also determined what would happen to the rest of the Louisiana Territory. Remember that big chunk of land that Jefferson bought? Well, basically, they took the 36.5 line of latitude and drew a line. If you were north of that line, slavery was blocked. Well, except Missouri. If you were south of the line, slavery was allowed. As people moved west, they wanted to continue their way of life. This compromise was definitely a temporary solution. So next, let's talk about the Compromise of 1850. First, let's hop in the jet. I want to show you something. Take a look at this building behind me here. This is the Franklin and Armfield office in Alexandria, Virginia. Doesn't look like much today, but prior to the Civil War, this was the largest slave trading market in Virginia. Alexandria used to be part of Washington, D.C., and as the capital was being built, slaves were bought and sold here to complete the construction. The Compromise of 1850 did away with the slave trade in Washington, D.C. That's one of the reasons Alexandria broke away and rejoined Virginia. They wanted to keep their slave trade. So anyway, let's get back to the Compromise of 1850. In 1849, California applied to become a state, a free state, which would upset the balance. It's all about balance, remember? At the same time, abolitionists were calling for a ban on slavery in Washington, D.C. There's a lot going on here, okay? Again, the South began talking about secession. They're all up in arms. But again, it was Henry Clay. He steps in and calms everyone down. He proposed this. He said, allow California as a free state, but don't limit slavery in the other territories that have not become states yet. Clay also said that they should only ban the slave trade in Washington, not slavery itself. Finally, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. This law stated that runaway slaves had to be returned to their owners, and anybody caught helping these runaways would either be fined or imprisoned. As a side note, This plan backfired for the South because Northerners now were exposed to the horrors of slavery much grander scale, and this compelled a lot more people to fight for the end of it. So, moving on, we have one more compromise to talk about, and that's the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Let's head out to location. While we're on the way, we will discuss the details. Basically, Stephen A. Douglas wanted to try and make both the North and South happy. He proposed that instead of following the Missouri Compromise, the settlers could vote. This is called popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty means the will of the people. Makes sense, right? If the people vote for something, then they'll be happy, right? Well, the problem is that people rushed in from all over the country to cast their vote. In 1854, about 1,500 voters lived in Kansas. When everything was counted, more than 6,000 people voted. Seems a little fishy, huh? So, we have people from both sides trying to sway the election. Then it turns violent. Here we are in Kansas, okay? After a pro-slavery group attacked abolitionists in Lawrence, Kansas, a man named John Brown led his group here. This is Pottawatomie Creek. Brown and his men attacked and killed 5 people. He killed one of the men with a broadsword. Seriously, a broadsword. Trust me, we're going to talk a lot more about John Brown in this unit, and it gets crazier. Anyway, these events were collectively known as Bleeding Kansas, as the border ruffians used violence to get their way. So, there you have it. We've talked about the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. All were band-aid fixes to the major cut that was slavery. Unfortunately, it took a war to settle this. Now, if you found this video interesting or informative, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. For Virtual History 360, thank you.